Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT07, and BT07 has a really fun and powerful deck in the form of red hybrids. Except, well, red hybrids with the ancient package is looking to be the stronger variant, just because the ancient package allows you to do some really solid damage relatively quickly. But that package, I do understand, is going to be a little bit on the expensive side, and not everyone has access to those cards. So here's the version of the deck without the ancient package, and you're essentially just going to be relying on your lower levels to be dealing lots of additional damage to be extra aggressive with. But red hybrids as a whole is a little bit on the slower side compared to some of the other hybrid decks, just because we don't necessarily have as many tech and tools to make ourselves as efficient as some of the other colors. So we make up for that slowness with as much damage potential as we can possibly deal. So without further ado, onto the deck profile. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running one copy of DemiMeramon. So this is the 5th Digitama. It could really be any Digitama you want it to be, but red doesn't necessarily have a lot of really good generic Digitamas, so we're just going to stick with the classic DP boost route, and DemiMeramon is one of the best cards to help us DP boost with an easy inheritable ability of when we're attacking a player, then we give our Digimon plus 1000 DP, so it works on all of our stages. But for this style of deck, the easiest Digitama to DP boost with is going to be the main Digitama of the deck, 4 copies of Kapurimon. So Kopuriman is just another DP booster, as I mentioned before, and its only condition for us gaining 1000 DP is us just having a Tamer in play, and well, because we're a hybrid-based deck, we're obviously going to have a Tamer in play, making this ability very easy to be online with. Next, onto the level 3s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Flamemon. So this is the BT04 version of Flamemon, and this Flamemon is going to be one of the deck's digging tools to try to help with its overall consistency. So it has the on-play ability, where we get to check the top 3 cards, add a Digimon with hybrid in its form, and or a Tamer card from among them into our hand, and then the rest go to the bottom. So it's looking for our other hybrids, which the deck is full of, and it's looking for our Tamers, which the deck is full of, so there's a very high chance of success when you're going to be trying to dig with this Flamemon. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Flamemon. So this is the BT06 version of Flamemon, and we're using this card mainly just because he has a really solid inheritable ability that gives our hybrids and 10 warriors the piercing ability, so that way we could try to attack into the opponent's Digimon, acting kind of like what green does, beat them up with our high levels of DP, and try to deal damage onto their security all at the same time. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Flamemon. So this is the BT07 version of Flamemon, and this Flamemon is a pretty okay card. His digging potential isn't as good as the BT04 Flamemon or our Bokomon, so we're mostly not going to want to use him to try to dig out our parts and pieces, just because he's only looking at the top 4 when we play him for either a hybrid, Susanomon, or Takuya. And just that limited search potential that makes him a little bit less viable of a searching tool. On top of the fact that he does have some weaker stats compared to some of the others, so he's even easier to remove. But we do want to actually use him more often than not as a solid inheritable that may or may not trigger depending on if we're actually able to see our Takuyas, just because his on-delete ability that he gives our higher stages makes playing our Takuya from our hand a little bit easier, but we don't necessarily want our Digimon to be dying, but they're going to be dying eventually, so it's just a good reward for when our Digimon actually does get deleted. And then the last level 3 of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Bokomon. So you can't run a hybrid deck without Bokomon, just because Bokomon is one of the best searching tools that hybrids have available to them. So what this card is doing is he's acting very similar to the BT04 Flamemon, except better. So he can check the top 5 instead of the top 3. You still get to take a hybrid, and you still get to take a Tamer, which is really good, except he has the added benefit where if you're running any 10 warriors, then you could also take a 10 warrior or the hybrid. So he just has more flexibility on the targets that he's searching for and digging for more cards than the BT04 Flamemon. So just between those two, you're going to have lots of good ways to try to find your parts and pieces. And then on top of that, he has a really solid passive ability while he's just chilling on the field, where during your turn once per turn, when your Tamer digivolves, then you get to gain 2 memory. So it's just a very easy way at making your evolutions cheap or free to be able to aggress with rather quickly and efficiently with. Next, on to the level 4s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Agunimon. So this is the BT04 version of Agunimon, and we're just using this as a basic hybrid to be able to climb our stages with. Red hybrids is a little bit on the slower side compared to some of the other hybrid decks, so I'm actually going to be prioritizing Agunimon over the BT04 version of BurningGreymon, just because we want to get up into our Aldamon more often than not, because that's going to be our key point of aggression. So having an easier way to climb our stages is going to be more valuable for this style of deck. But I'm going to be running 2 copies of BurningGreymon just because it's still a really solid aggro point for us to be using. So BurningGreymon on top of Takuya is just a very, very powerful, allowing us to be as aggro as level 4, and it's going to be a very high point of aggro just because BurningGreymon has this nice ability where we get to gain 3000 DP during our turn. So this combined with Takuya means that we're going to be gaining 5,000 DP during our turn, so that way this is going to be swinging for 11k with security tech +1, making it just a very solid card we want to use to aggress with. But we do need to save and use our Takuyas a little bit wisely, so it's not necessarily the best thing to always do, just because we might not see our Takuyas as often as we want. So him evoing for 3 is a little bit on the slower side compared to Agunimon evoing for 2, and they both have the very stereotypical hybrid ability to be able to Digivolve on top of our Tamers as if they were level 3 Digimon, but unfortunately we don't have a whole lot of good Tamers that we actually want to be using as Digivolution points. So most of the time we're actually going to be Digivolving these on top of our level 3s, and that's just inherently slower than Digivolving them on top of our Tamers. But with all that being said, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of BurningGreymon. So BurningGreymon is a really interesting card just because we have various different ways that we could play the card. We could Digivolve him for 3 off of a level 3, which again is what you're going to be doing more often than not, and that is kind of just slow inherently. We could Digivolve him for 1 on top of a level 4, but again, we're not going to want to do that a whole lot, and again, why I'm running more Agunimons, because when we do need to do that play, then we're going to try to make it as efficient and not feel as bad as best as we possibly can, because Digivolving our BT04 BurningGreymon into this BurningGreymon just feels really bad because the other one is a way better card at being aggressive with as a level 4. And then on top of that, he also has the availability to Digivolve on top of our red Tamer as if it was a level 3 for only 2. So that's the primary reason why we want to run this card, is because of all of those different evolution points on how we could potentially use the card, and we want to use the card mainly to try to pick apart the opponent's low-level Digimon because of his when Digivolving ability, where when we Digivolve them on top of a Takuya or a hybrid, then we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 4,000 DP or less, mainly trying to pick off the opponent's Bokomons or level 3 Floodgate cards. Next, on to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Aldamon. So this is the BT04 version of Aldamon, and this Aldamon is going to be one of the primary stopping points on one of the cards we're wanting to aggress with more often than not. So this card just natively has security tech +1, so he's already going to be hitting for 2 checks no matter what, on top of the fact that he also passively buffs himself during our turn, where when this Digimon has a hybrid in its inheritable source or a Tamer in its inheritable source, then this Digimon gains plus 4,000 DP, making him 11,000 with security tech +1, and if we Digivolved him on top of a Takuya stack, then he could be even stronger and deal even more damage, making him one of the strongest level 5s for us to be using. And speaking of really strong level 5s for us to be using, I'm also going to be running 4 copies of Aldamon. So this is the BT07 version of Aldamon, and this card is not necessarily as strong as the BT04 version of Aldamon, but it does have some better synergy with how the deck wants to play. So what we're trying to do with this card is utilize the fact that we could Evo him for 1 on top of a Digimon that has a Tamer in its Digivolution source, so we have easy ways to climb up our stages, on top of the fact that he has a very powerful when Digivolving ability, where if this Digimon Digivolved on top of a hybrid, then it'll gain plus 4,000 DP, making him 12k if we're swinging with him, or making whatever mega we're going to be using even stronger just because we have easy ways to climb up our stages. And then on top of that, he also has a nice inheritable ability that we're really trying to take advantage of, where during your turn, while this Digimon is a hybrid or 10 warrior, then it doesn't activate the security ability of option cards in the opponent's security. So this is just a very powerful inheritable ability, so that way we could try to swing for as much damage as we possibly can, as safely as we possibly can. And we could use this in combination with Takuya to shove him under Takuya to be able to give this ability to whatever hybrid we're actually going to be wanting to use on top of our Takuya. And then our main and only mega of the deck is going to be 4 copies of EmperorGreymon. So EmperorGreymon is going to mostly be a win condition for what the deck is trying to do, just because he has the win digivolving ability of Blitz, so that way we could try to use our Aldamons to deal as much damage as we possibly can, then sneak an extra attack in with our EmperorGreymon with the Blitz ability. Hopefully off of a Takuya that's just sitting on the field. Even if we do just have to climb, having the Blitz ability just means that we could digivolve all the way up and still be able to swing, so it's just a very versatile effect to be using. And then on top of that, he also has another ability where during your turn, once per turn, when this Digimon is blocked, you get to unsuspend it, and then you get to gain 1 memory for each Digivolution source that this Digimon has that has hybrid in its traits. So this secondary ability is almost never going to be happening, which is a little bit unfortunate just because blockers are kind of phased out of the meta, and this is part of the reason why blockers are phased out of the meta, is just because you're actively being rewarded for having the opponent be able to block you, especially since we could pair them up with piercing and various other abilities. It really just makes blockers bad, so the secondary ability is almost never going to matter. But it's still a hybrid, it still has Blitz, and we have various different ways to use the card, making him still a very strong card to use. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Atomic Inferno. So Atomic Inferno is probably the best option that this deck has, just because it allows us to deal even more damage on our various different stages. So it has the nice main ability where one of our Digimon with hybrids in its form gets plus 3000 DP and security attack plus 1, guaranteeing we're going to be dealing more damage onto the opponent. So this is just a very easy to use card, especially in combination with Takuya, to be able to give whatever Digimon we want a lot of extra DP and a lot of extra security damage. Then speaking of security damage, it also has a nice security ability where all of our Digimon gain security attack plus 1. This isn't just targeting a specific Digimon, it's all of our Digimon, so we could start digivolving our hybrids on our Tamers and still be able to gain the security attack plus 1. We can move our Digimon out of raising and still gain the security attack plus 1. It's just a very easy and very powerful way to deal lots of damage as a whole, whether it's coming out of our security or from our hand. And then lastly, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Tai Kamiya. So this is the BT01 version of Tai Kamiya, and this is going to be the deck's dedicated memory fixing tamer. If you're on a budget and you don't want to run Tai Kamiya, then this could easily be Marcus, just because you're looking for that memory fixing ability to always be hard set to 3 if your memory is ever less than 3. So we need to be at 3, so that way we could try to make our plays as efficient as we possibly can, just because red is a very inefficient color on trying to do lots of its things compared to some of the other colors. And then on top of that, the reason why we want to play Tai over Marcus is because his passive ability is just better. His passive ability states that all of our red Digimon with 4 or more Digivolution sources gains security attack plus 1, so that way our higher level Digimon can deal as much damage as they possibly can, and this has really good synergy with Takuya, because Takuya is going to be adding 5 hybrids from our trash underneath him to be able to turn Tai Kamiya online on any of our hybrids, which makes our hybrids even more aggressive than they normally would when you have this card set up. And speaking of Takuya, next I'm going to be running 4 copies of Takuya. So Takuya is kind of the glue that makes the deck work, just because, well, red actually doesn't have very high tamer quality. So we really do need to run Takuya in order to be as effective with our hybrids as we possibly can. But what this card is doing is he has the main ability where we get to place 5 cards with hybrids in their traits from our trash underneath this tamer, and then we could digivolve this tamer into an EmperorGreymon as if it was a level 5 Digimon. So no, sticking the cards underneath doesn't just make this count as a level 5 for anything, it's just only going to be using that ability to be able to digivolve into EmperorGreymon. But the powerful thing about Takuya, what's making him so insane, is the fact that you don't have to digivolve into EmperorGreymon after shoving the 5 cards underneath. So you could shove the 5 cards underneath and then digivolve into something like Agunimon, Kopuriman to be able to climb the stages with to get into an Aldamon stack to make Aldamon as powerful as you possibly can, just because he has a nice inheritable ability that we want to take advantage of, where during your turn, this Digimon gains plus 2000 DP, and while this Digimon has more than 10,000 DP, then it also gains security attack plus 1, which is very easy for a lot of our Digimon to achieve because they're going to be DP boosting themselves, and we have various other DP boosts that we could pair up with them to be able to make this online as often as we possibly can, to be able to deal as much damage and live through that damage as often as we possibly can. Next, I'm going to be playing 2 copies of Tai Kamiya. So I'm only playing this version of Tai Kamiya that comes from the starter deck just because he's a very efficient tamer to just hard play and sit on the field. So he is a red tamer that has a play cost of 2, which is a lot cheaper than 3 or 4, and on top of that he has a decent passive ability that we could try to take advantage of to give all of our Digimon plus 1000 DP, making them even stronger. So most of the time we're just using this card for evolution fodder for our other hybrids, but when we actually do just want him to sit on the field, his passive ability is pretty nice. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Analog Youth. So Analog Youth has some really good synergy with how Red Hybrids wants to work because it's a cheap tamer to play, even though we're not going to be digivolving on top of it because he is a white tamer. His on-play ability to help with the deck's consistency and to fill up our trash is what we're trying to gain out of the card more often than not. So his on-play ability allows us to check the top 3 cards of our deck, add 1 Digimon into our hand, and then the rest go into the trash. So we want to fill up our trash as quickly as we possibly can, so that way we could put Takuya's ability online as quickly as we can to be able to use him for whatever we need him to be used for. And then on top of that, he actually does have a pretty solid upside, where during all turns, when one of our level 5 Digimon or higher gets deleted, then we get to suspend this tamer, gain a memory, and hatch a Digi-Egg into an empty space in our raising area. So we are going to be stopping at our level 5s more often than not, because the Aldamons just are going to be the main points of aggression, so we could still take advantage of this ability, but our level 5s are still good enough, and we even still have a level 6 to be able to use this ability, and it's not a bad ability to have, even though it's not going to be used as often as in the Ancient build. And then there's still just a lot of room to explore with the deck, depending on the type of cards you want to use and the direction you want to take it in. So we could think about using the Agumon as just another way to try to dig out our tamers, just because his on-play ability can check any color of tamer, and it's looking at the top 5, which is a pretty sizable searching tool. Then we also do have a Floodgate or anti-meta rookie in the form of Gaussmon to try to stop the opponent from being able to reduce their Digivolution costs, which is pretty good and important in a hybrid-based meta to stop them from going into their level 5 hybrids. Then if we do just want to be aggressive with our rookies, then we even have something like the promo Greymon to try to be aggressive with, just because when he attacks we get to draw a card, and we have multiple different ways to try to boost the card based on our eggs and based on the tamers that we're going to be playing. Having Metal Greymon is actually pretty decent. You could also consider using Nemon for a very similar style of effect, where we're just using him to hard play, and then he's going to be able to play a tamer, but the upside to Metal Greymon is if we already have a tamer in play, then he's going to be gaining us memory instead, with a pretty decent inheritable ability to give us some memory when we delete the opponent's Digimon. Then, as I mentioned before, you do have the Ancient package with the promo Agunimon to be able to make some very powerful and very aggressive plays with, just because you want to try to take advantage of all of your inheritable abilities and all of your stack to be able to make Ancient deal as much damage as he possibly could. But if you really wanted to try to be cute and cheeky, you could use some various other level 6s to accomplish something very similar. So you could think about it using the BT01 Greymon to just use it for that Aldamon inheritable ability, except just on a Digimon himself. And then on top of that, we could even try to think about using the starter deck Greymon to try to take advantage of the fact that we're going to have a very large stack just because of how Takuya wants to be working. And then we do have some level 7s that we could think about using, so if you want, you could try to use the BT01 Omnimon to try to use Takuya to shove multiple level 6s in his inheritable source to be able to swing with that card multiple times while deleting a Digimon, or you could just try to win the game and use the BT05 Omnimon for his 2 when Digivolving abilities to unsuspend himself and gain the Blitz ability to close out games with, and if you're unable to close out the game, then you still could take advantage of the fact that you could shove multiple level 6s to make his protection ability a little bit stronger. Then we also have Susanomon as probably the best level 7 for the deck, just because, well, it's already interacting with our Tamers and Hybrids, and, well, that's kind of what we're already trying to do with the deck as a whole. So he also is going to be helping delete a Digimon and deal some extra damage in a pinch when we need him, or if we're going to be using him at all. Then, as I mentioned before, red just isn't the most efficient of colors when it comes to playing around with memory, so we could try to shore up some of that weakness with running Gravity Crush to gain some instant memory, and the downside isn't necessarily a downside if the opponent is already going to be set to a high memory count anyway, or if you're going to be winning the game, then again, it just doesn't matter for that downside. And speaking of efficiency in trying to gain some extra memory to make more powerful plays possible, we also have red memory boost that's helping with the deck's overall consistency on trying to dig through the top 4 for a red Digimon, which the majority of the deck is going to be red Digimon. And then on top of that, the delay ability to gain 2 memory at a later turn could help you make a very powerful push turn when you need it to. But we also do want efficient ways to be able to play our Tamers, so we also do have some option cards that help accomplish this goal while acting as some solid removal in the form of Trident Revolver. And then speaking of removal, we do have some really good removal options that we could be running, so we could also think about running Gaia Force because it's Gaia Force, just to try to deal with large threats and bodies we might not be able to deal with otherwise. And then we do have some various other options to try to take advantage of, so Atomic Blaster, Gigastorm, and so on and so forth just allow us to try to deal with multiple bodies. And then if you want to try to run something a little bit cuter, then we also have access to win rate 60% to try to help it cheese on our tempo efficiency, because this is another card that's just allowing us to go up our stages relatively easy with, depending on the level 6 that you're going to want to use. So just using win rate 60% is essentially just discarding a card, which is help filling up our trash for Takuya, and minusing 2 to the Digivolution, so that way we could try to make whatever our level 6 or 7 we're going to be using even easier to use. And then, as I stated, we could just run Marcus instead of Tai if you're going to be a little bit more budget friendly, just because Marcus is a significantly cheaper card for having a pretty okay ability to pair up with whatever level 6 you could be using in tandem with EmperorGreymon, because EmperorGreymon is still actually a Greymon. So we could try to take advantage of his passive ability to suspend him to be able to gain some instant memory to try to make some more powerful follow-up plays with, or making the fact that we're using our Blitz a little bit more efficiently when we're passing the turn onto the opponent after the Blitz attack is done. But for the most part, this is just my interpretation of a really solid core or shell for a red hybrid deck without using the ancient package. And I think the red hybrid deck can still do some really solid work, even though red's tamer quality isn't necessarily the highest and its efficiency isn't the highest compared to some of the other colors and the other hybrid based decks. The damage output that the deck can do more than makes up for some of those weaknesses at times, and this isn't even including any spicy sub-packages that you could run in tandem with the deck to really spice it up and make it something unique. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.